What's supposed to be Al Gore's big night in Los Angeles. But as Gore takes center stage at the Democratic convention, the Republican-backed special prosecutor puts President Clinton back in the spotlight. The Russian submarine disaster. Did the sub hit a surface ship? And after 50 years, a reunion like no other.
This is the CBS Evening News, with Dan Rather reporting from the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles.
Good evening. Timing is everything. Al Gore must stand and deliver here tonight as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee. And now Gore must do so against the backdrop of a potentially damaging, carefully orchestrated story leak about President Clinton. The story is that Republican-backed Special Prosecutor Robert Ray, Ken Starr's successor, has a new grand jury looking into possible criminal charges against the president growing out of Mr. Clinton's sex life. CBS's Jim Stewart in Washington has that story and the context.
Independent counsel Robert Ray quietly notified the Justice Department a month ago he intended to call a grand jury on the Lewinsky affair, and according to one report, the panel has already met and begun to hear evidence. The questions are the same as during the president's impeachment last year. Did Mr. Clinton lie or obstruct justice while testifying about the affair? Only this time the stakes are different. The president was acquitted in his impeachment trial and thus allowed to finish office. This time, the result could be criminal charges after he leaves the White House in January. Before the news broke, the president played golf today and had his mind on tonight's Democratic convention.
Any last-minute advice for the vice president?
He'll be great. He's always great on these big speeches. He'll be great.
Privately, however, administration officials were seething at the timing of the disclosure just hours before Gore was to make his case to follow Clinton in office. It's a hatchet job, said one justice official who noted that under law, grand jury proceedings are supposed to be secret. It reeks to high heaven, said a spokesman at the White House. Originally investigated by former independent counsel Ken Starr, there's no indication that any new evidence has surfaced in the perjury case or that any new witnesses can be expected. The mere calling of a grand jury, of course, does not necessarily mean that an indictment is on its way or even that the grand jury will be asked to issue one. But 9 times out of 10, prosecutors don't call one unless that's exactly what they intend to do. Dan?
Jim Stewart. The leak is the political equivalent of a hand grenade being rolled onto the floor of this convention. So joining us here is CBS News special correspondent Gloria Borger. She's been checking with her sources in the Gore camp about all this. Gloria, what's the reaction there?
Well, Dan, the Democrats here wasted no time in responding to the news, or more precisely to the timing of this leak. One top Gore advisor portrayed it as part of what he called a, quote, grand Republican strategy to tie Al Gore to President Clinton. While he stopped short of blaming the Bush campaign directly, he did charge that, quote, this was plopped on us deliberately. It's more of the same, he said, and people are wise to it. The hope of the Gore campaign is that this leak will fire up their troops and backfire against the Republicans. How? By tying George W. Bush to Kenneth Starr, Dan.
Gloria Borger, thanks. Against this backdrop, Al Gore knows, and so do his opponents, that he has a potentially pivotal opportunity here tonight to connect with voters, to say from his head and heart where he wants to take the country and why he should be the one to lead it. Gore says his speech will go long on substance to spell out what he calls clear differences with Republicans. CBS's John Roberts has a preview.
This is the image the Gore campaign will stress tonight. A kinder, gentler candidate, as strong in personality as he is on policy.
Well, certainly he needs to seem human and natural, and not like the politician that he has gained that reputation for being.
In a speech that could be the most important of his life, Gore will touch on favorite themes of Social Security, health care, education, and the economy. He'll also propose bi-weekly town meetings as a conduit to voters' concerns. But much of the speech will draw on his personal experiences.
When I was in Vietnam, I
lost my dad a year and a half ago.
Tipper and I just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary, incidentally.
Believing that he's well known but not known well, Gore has been reintroducing himself to voters on the campaign trail. An attempt to get past an image Democratic Party elder Bob Strauss says is decidedly negative.
The public has looked at Al Gore as a vice president, and they find him unappealing in that role. And he has to deal with that now.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
Past acceptance speeches have been big moments, but with Gore behind in the polls and lagging on issues from leadership to education, rarely has so much been riding on how the nominee performs.
I think there's potential greater downside than upside here. That is, he does not want to lose the election by having a bad speech in a bad convention.
Gore has double duty tonight. Not only must he reach out to new voters, but also energize a base that has been sometimes lukewarm.
If he doesn't do a bang-up boffo job tonight, what's the risk? I don't want to think about it.
The Gore campaign has been encouraged by new polls that they say show the vice president closing the gap with Governor Bush. But there are concerns that if he goes too long on policy, too short on vision tonight, it could turn some voters off. Dan?
John Roberts, thanks. Into the mix of what Gore is up against tonight, he has to unite the party behind him and reach out to core Democrats and independents nationwide. 60 Minutes man Ed Bradley is taking the pulse on that down there on the convention floor. Ed?
Dan, for some Democrats here looking at the polls, there's a sense of anxiety. Liberals concerned about a centrist ticket are taking a pragmatic, if not enthusiastic approach, saying we don't have a choice. We have to fish in the waters where we are. One top Democrat also told me that he feels there are too many people here comparing Al Gore to Bill Clinton, and he thinks that's unfair. In his words, Bill Clinton is to American politics what Tiger Woods is to golf. They play a different game. The president is a masterful politician who has shown an ability to reach out to all segments of his party, as well as to independents. Al Gore has yet to show that he can do that. He hasn't even secured his base. At the moment, George Bush has the support of 90% of people who call themselves Republicans. Gore has the support of only 70% of the Democrats. If he can't improve those numbers, Dan, he can't win in November.
Ed Bradley. We have an update now on Arizona Senator John McCain's medical condition, his new bout with skin cancer, and the treatment he's getting for it. CBS's Bob Schieffer is here with that. Bob?
Dan, McCain underwent another 3.5 hours of tests at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona today. He was in good spirits as he left the clinic, but he will undergo surgery on Saturday to remove one melanoma from his left arm, a more complicated procedure to remove another from his left temple. He told friends today he expects the surgery to take 3 to 4 hours and that he'll probably be in the hospital for 2 to 3 days, depending on how the surgery goes. They really won't know if the cancer is spread until after the surgery. The people who talked to him today say he is upbeat, but he knows this is a serious thing. He's going to meet with his doctors again tomorrow, then talk about it for the first time with reporters. In the meantime, he went to the movies this afternoon to see The Gladiator.
Thanks, Bob. Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, a new theory about why the Russian sub sank and the Russian president is feeling heat. And later, how the insurance industry seeks insurance of access to Joe Lieberman. Only silence today at the bottom of the sea, where 118 sailors, many of them young, are trapped in a submarine with what's described as a terrifying hole in its side. And on land, a suddenly angry public is blaming Russia's president for the slow and seemingly inept rescue effort. As CBS's Richard Roth reports, that anger grows from the anguish of the missing men's families.
Anything that brings me closer to my son, the words of a sailor's desperate parent arriving in Murmansk on Russia's northern coast, where 80 miles offshore, the nuclear submarine Kursk still lies crippled on the ocean floor. This was its launch 6 years ago, the fiercest attack sub in Russia's fleet. Now it's massively damaged, the Navy says, from the bow where weapons were kept to the conning tower just above the control room. Russian TV tonight said there was flooding when the sub went down and surely some deaths. Help from the British Navy is on the way, a sophisticated 21-ton mini-sub designed for difficult rescues. But it's sailing from Norway and won't arrive till Saturday. There's concern that'll be too late. In Brussels, to consult NATO officials on how the rescue will be attempted, Russia's #2 admiral today disputed earlier claims air supplies on the sub will run out tomorrow. He claimed the men on the Kursk could survive 2 weeks or more.
My personal opinion, there's quite enough oxygen on board the ship.
The contradictions in Russia's cloak of secrecy are angering relatives of the crew. My husband sacrificed everything, one woman said, and the government's telling us nothing. Much of the criticism has been aimed at Russia's normally hands-on president, Vladimir Putin, who has seemed strikingly hands-off during this crisis. He's not interrupted his vacation, and no senior government official was sent to oversee the rescue effort until today. Like the rest of the nation tonight, he may simply be glued to Russian TV, broadcasting the first live pictures from above the sunken sub. A drama all the more remarkable here because its outcome is so uncertain. Richard Roth, CBS News, Moscow.
A short time ago, I spoke with Sky TV reporter Lawrence Lee in Murmansk, home port of Russia's northern fleet. I asked him what the Russian Navy is saying now about the cause of the disaster.
This evening, the Deputy Prime Minister Klebanov became the first Russian minister to visit here, and he said that in his view, this had been caused by a severe collision, possibly with an icebreaker. But he said despite that severe collision, it was his strong belief that a large part of the crew would have been able to escape to the back of the craft in relative safety.
Is it a death watch in Murmansk, or is hope still alive?
Well, there is some hope, and this is courtesy of Russian state television. Tonight we've seen pictures for the first time of the rescue site. Put simply, they show a number of warships, an icebreaker, the submersible craft we know about, effectively circling the submarine. So the rescue attempts are going on, but underwater they haven't managed to make any contact yet with the Kursk.
Ashley, thank you very much. There are new developments in the Firestone tire recall, which the company says it won't complete until next spring. The head of Ford called the pace of the recall unacceptable. Ford and Firestone indefinitely extended a payback plan for owners of recalled tires who replace them with other brands. A member of Congress said a full-scale investigation is likely, and Texas police suspect a shredding Firestone tire led to the crash of a Ford Explorer Tuesday night that killed a Florida doctor. Police say the tire was made at Firestone's Decatur, Illinois plant. Up next from Los Angeles, Convention Close-Up, a hard news investigation into why the insurance industry thinks it's in good hands with Joe Lieberman. On the CBS Health Watch, the makers of Norplant birth control drug implants warn that batches shipped since last October may not be fully effective. The implants are supposed to work for 5 years. These may not. 1 million American women have used Norplant for birth control. There's more news tonight about potential conflicts of interest between the corporate office and elective office. Halliburton Oil Services Company confirms that Republican vice presidential candidate Dick Cheney has millions of dollars in stock options he cannot cash in until long after the new administration takes office. And as the Republican ticket takes hits for its big oil connections, the Democrats face fire too for Senator Joseph Lieberman's deep pocket backers. That's tonight's Convention Close-Up, reported by Anthony Mason.
He may be number 2 on the ticket, but Joe Lieberman is number 1 with insurance companies, raising nearly $200,000 in industry contributions, more than any other Senate candidate this year.
Like every other senator, Lieberman is naturally responsive to his constituency in Connecticut.
One look at the skyline in the Connecticut Capitol will tell you what that constituency is.
When you think insurance, you think Hartford, Connecticut. So the idea that Lieberman would strongly support insurance, but also get financial support for them, isn't quite as insidious as it might seem on the surface.
Just what has the insurance industry gotten for its support of Lieberman?
As some of you know, I've supported just about every tort reform proposal that's come along the track.
Joe Lieberman is one of very few Democrats who've championed tort reform, legislation limiting damage awards in lawsuits, including those against HMOs.
It really reduces the price of doing business, and that's why business is in favor of it. And of course, it reduces the fees that lawyers can get, and that's why the lawyers are so strongly opposed.
And that could be a problem for this ticket, says Professor Larry Sabato, because trial lawyers are among the party's most generous contributors.
And they're providing literally tens of millions. It may amount to over $100 million to the Democratic Party at all levels in 2000.
But Lieberman can offer the Democratic ticket some support where Gore has had trouble finding it, here on Wall Street. The Connecticut senator has raised almost as much money from the securities industry as he has from the insurance business.
Remember that Joe Lieberman is a pro-business Democrat who supported lower capital gains taxes.
And if candidate Gore is looking for a little more credibility in the business community, Joe Lieberman just might offer him some insurance. Anthony Mason, CBS News, New York.
Up next on the CBS Evening News, tears of joy can mend a broken heart, and perhaps the bitter wounds of war. In Korea, this was the day of 200 goodbyes, half a century after being torn from their families by a war that raged for 3 bloody years. 200 Koreans had just 3 days to reclaim their stolen lives. 3 days that ended today. CBS's Barry Peterson has their story on assignment in Seoul.
This Cold War wall has not come down. The heavily fortified line between South Korea and the Communist North breached this week not by bullets, but by tears. I thought you were dead, she says. 100 people traveled to the south, another 100 to the north, each one a story of lives wrenched apart 50 years ago. Families scattered before the warring armies of North and South, and for the last 5 decades there was no communication allowed. An Sun-hwan left for school and never came home. Mother Lee Duk-sun, now suffering from stomach cancer, told us she gave her son up for dead. It's a miracle, she said, but the real miracle was the meeting. I see you for the first time in 50 years, says An Sun-hwan, a grown man who admitted, I just want to call you my mommy. They filled in the missing years, sometimes with old photographs, sometimes just by touching.
These were the lucky few, the very, very few. Some 75,000 South Koreans applied for this reunion. For those who didn't make it, this is just another bitter day added to 50 years of waiting.
The reunions came after the first summit ever between North and South since the war. North Korea's reclusive leader says now there should be more reunions. Like this wife seeing her missing husband, and he, for the first time, seeing his daughter. If it's a dream, the daughter told us, I hope it lasts forever. These small moments could someday lead to a larger moment, reunification between North and South. The bitterness of war finally washed away with tears of joy. On assignment in Seoul, I'm Barry Peterson.
Outside this convention hall, protesters were back in the streets today. The protests this week have been largely peaceful, but there have been a few clashes with the Los Angeles police, who've made 192 arrests since the weekend, 59 for felonies, 133 for misdemeanors. Well, what does Andy Rooney think about the demonstrators? If you care, you just have to ask him. So we did.
We've all been saying how dull political conventions are since the nomination of the party candidate has been decided long before the delegates meet at their convention to decide that. The only groups who have benefited from these uneventful conventions are the demonstrators. Television news producers like some action, so they show you demonstrators. Demonstrators depend on that. You viewers complain about violence on television, but we know you're sneaky. You watch it. It's not all our fault. Some of it's your fault. So you've been shown demonstrators being arrested, being handcuffed. You've seen them pepper sprayed. You've seen phalanxes of police moving on them with swords drawn. Unfortunately, most of the demonstrations at both conventions have been as uninteresting as the speeches. A peaceful demonstration is no demonstration at all. One problem is that the demonstrators haven't made it clear what they're for or against. We know they're mad, but we aren't sure who they're mad at. They don't have a Vietnam War to protest. The demonstrators apparently feel that our presidential election has been taken out of the hands of average Americans and turned over to the people with the most money. Well, you won't find me out there holding up a dumb sign. You won't find me being hog-tied by the police and thrown into the back of a paddy wagon. But if money is what they're demonstrating about, I agree with them. Our presidential election has been taken over by the people with the most money. Unfortunately, no street demonstration is going to change that.
Andy Rooney, and that's part of our world tonight. I'll be back with CBS News live coverage of the Democratic Convention finale, including Al Gore's acceptance speech at 9 o'clock, 8 Central Time. Till then, Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News, reporting tonight from Los Angeles. Have a good evening.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
Should a cop killer get out on parole? Eye on America tomorrow. Experience CBS News.